Welcome to Grappling with the Great, a forum for promoting an ethical mindset and ethical decision-making to help us more clearly see both sides of complex issues and better navigate the moral challenges of everyday life. I'm Rabbi Yonason Goldson, and I would like to welcome my guest for today. With me is Janice Litvin. She works with leaders and teams to banish burnout in their organizations through keynote speeches, workshops, and accountability groups. She is also author of the Banish Burnout Toolkit. Eric Zabugalski, did I get that right?
A+.
All right. Who is a technical and organizational consultant, professor of HR management, and author of Unthink, All You Have to Do Is Nothing. And Frank Zakari, who is a business and organizational development expert, keynote speaker, TV and podcast host, four-time Amazon bestselling author, and Air Force veteran. Thank you for your service. Welcome to all of you.
Thank you. Great to be here.
Thank you.
And here is our scenario for today. You're pacing back and forth outside your favorite restaurant and talking on your cell phone as you wait for your friend Terry, who's meeting you for lunch. Terry shows up, reaches down to the sidewalk, and comes up holding a $50 bill. Is this yours? He asks. You remember getting change for $100 that morning and still finishing up your phone conversation. You check your wallet. No 50? Yeah, that must be mine, you say, thanking Terry as you take the bill and put it in your wallet. After lunch, you go to your car, reach in your pocket for your keys, and come out with a $50 bill. You recheck your wallet, another $50 bill. You realize that you didn't drop the 50, you merely misplaced it. The one Terry picked up off the ground wasn't yours at all. Now what do? Does Terry have any more claim to the $50 than you do? Is it unethical for you to keep it for yourself? The floor is open.
I have so many thoughts about this. First of all, I think the $50 is relative. If it were a dime or a quarter or a dollar, I wouldn't care about it. But what if I were a billionaire? $50, I wouldn't care about $50 either. So I think you have, first of all, have to look at the relativity of the amount of money.
That's a really interesting point, right?
That is.
You know, while ethical principles should be universal,
Yeah.
but there is a point at which we really don't care. You know, I don't care whose dime it is.
Exactly.
Right.
$50, as you say, is a little more substantial. And for
Right.
some people, that won't be significant either. So this is one of those situations, that word situation. We talk a lot about what are called situational ethics, which is, I believe, an insidious phrase. It is used to mean that ethics change depending on the situations, which I don't believe is true at all. But situations are all different, and that means the application of ethics to different situations is going to be different. So I think it's a good way of starting us off, Janice. Thank you. Frank, you had something?
That was good. This actually happened to me. I was very similar, waiting for lunch on the phone, waiting for a friend. And it wasn't a $50 bill. He found a $20 bill. And I thought, yeah, I probably dropped it but I didn't check. So he gives me the money. We go in. I say, look, I'll buy lunch. You know, you saved me $20 here. So I buy lunch, and I came out and did discover, no, it wasn't mine. I didn't drop it. So I called him and told him. I said, hey, you know, the money you found, okay, my screw up. I put the money in a different pocket. I see it. It's yours. I'll bring it to you. Now he said, don't worry about it. He said, you bought me lunch. And that was pretty much the end of the discussion. So it was a matter of, I think, had I not done it, it might have been a different response. But what do you think?
Eric, what are your thoughts?
I think, you know, I had a little bit different thought than Janice. I think that $50, while it's not, you know, it wouldn't be detrimental to me, probably amount to a tank of gas in my SUV. It could be a game changer for some people, or it could, you know, it could have a bad effect. It could be groceries for somebody who really needed them. So I had a similar thing happen to me that Frank described. I was in Tampa. My wife and I were having dinner, and after we sat down at the table, I looked down between my table and the table next to us, which was a young man and his wife, who had also sat down, and there was $40 folded up on the ground. We both saw it at the same time, and I got to it first. And we decided that we talked to a waiter that walked by, and he said that he thought another waiter had dropped it, but he couldn't identify who that waiter was. I don't remember the circumstances, but I ended up giving it to the young man at the table next to me, and leaving it for him to find the waiter. But I can't remember if it was after my wife and I left, or because I felt his eyes upon me, with that money, and sort of waiting to see what I would do with it. So I think I felt a little bit of relief by handing it to him, to find that waiter. And while I looked and tried to locate that waiter that might have dropped it, nobody else came by our table. So I gave it to the neighboring table, and we left. And I don't know what happened to
And you hope he gave it to the waiter.
it. Right.
Yeah. But this is sometimes we're more concerned about how we will be perceived than the actual right or wrong. And I think there is a legitimacy to that. Appearances do mean something.
Mhm.
And even if I might, you have money on the ground that can't be traced back to its original source. Ethically, it really is fair game. If there's no indication whose it could be, then it could be anybody's, and once it could be anybody's, it's everybody's, whoever happens to pick it up first. The question is, how far should I go to, one, try to find the owner if he can be found, or she could be found, and second, to avoid the appearance that I'm an opportunist, that I'm taking advantage of the situation, because that also has a corrosive effect on society.
Yeah, I had kind of mixed feelings, because when I handed it over to the other table, I felt a little bit of relief that I no longer had to be responsible for it or finding its owner. And I was also wondering what they were going to do with it. And I try to dismiss those thoughts that that's not any of my business and I shouldn't fret over that. So, no pun intended. Maybe I was passing the buck.
Yeah, could be. Let's change the scenario a little bit. Let's say down here at La Jolla by San Diego, they have a lot of things by the ocean. They have a lot of vendor things that are out there. Now, let's say you're walking along and you find a $50 bill on the ground, and there's all these vendors around there, and there's all these people around there. Now, what do you do? $50. I like how Janice positioned $50 to me isn't the end of the world. I really don't care one way or the other. Do you just say, hey, anybody drop this? There's going to be 200 people that are going to say, yeah, it's mine. So how far do you go to try to find out who it is, or do you just give it to a kid that you see?
Well, I think if it's pretty obvious who dropped it, like if there's a woman walking near you and her purse is hanging open, I might say, hey, are you missing $50? But really, I kind of want to respond to something Jonas-san said a moment ago about how we appear to others. I think at the end of the day, we want to appear to ourselves as doing the right thing.
Yep.
And so for me, if the other person, if I don't think the other person needs the money and I don't need the money, why don't we split the difference and give it to charity? Give it to the American Heart Association, maybe add another zero and both chip in for something for an impoverished family, or however, whatever charity you like to give to. So we want to feel good about ourselves at the end of the day, I think.
Yeah, and that's that's when you really get into a question of maybe even going beyond ethics, if that's a phrase. There's absolutely, if this is truly ownerless, if I cannot identify whose it is, I mean, let's go back to the original case with Terry. We really don't know whose it is.
Right.
If he would have picked it up, it would have been his.
Yep.
But he picked it up, not sure that he was acquiring it for himself. He thought perhaps it was mine. I legitimately thought it was mine. Now it's in my possession. I don't really have an obligation to give it back to him because it was never his in the first place. Right? But there is that idea of a kind of philosophical fairness that neither one of us would have ended up with $50 unless we had both been there.
Right.
So rather than asking, what do I have to do? Or even what's the right thing to do? We can ask, what can I do? How can we take this situation and direct it to the greatest mutual benefit possible?
That's a great point. I like how Janice positioned it in the beginning. Again, is, do you need it? If Terry needs it, if he's having some challenges, you keep it. Okay. If I was in a position where I needed it, then I might, depending on how desperate I was, say, well, I could use it. But I think we want to feel good about ourselves, but we also, I think it's an innate fairness. What's fair and what's right, and that has a lot to do with ethics. And again, it doesn't have to just simply be ethics. I would look at it and like I said in the beginning, is if I wouldn't even taken it and put it in my wallet, I would have just said, hey, you found it, keep it, that works, and then see what he goes from there. I would let him decide. Kind of like Eric, pass the buck.
We're trading stories. I just remembered a story about my uncle, and I think this happened in college. You'll get a sense of how long ago this would have been. That he went to the pencil sharpener, and when he got there, there was a $20 bill lying beside the pencil sharpener. And, this was many decades ago when $20 was a significant amount of money for most people. And he, there's no indication of this it could be, so he took it for himself. And a moment later, another student came over and said, I'm missing some money. Did you happen to find some? And he said, well, yeah, what are you missing? He says, $20. I says, well, what denominations? And the guy said, 2 10s. He said, sorry, can't help you. Now, who knows, did this guy see him
Pick up the money
and figure maybe I can take advantage of the situation? In Jewish law, this is actually the way you handle finding something that's lost, that doesn't have identifying markers. You publicize lost object or lost something of value found, and then people tell you what they're missing. And then you ask for some identification that would indicate that it's genuinely theirs. But at the same time, if they can't provide any kind of evidence that it's theirs, you're certainly under no obligation to give it to them. But as you say, and you've all made this point, that if I recognize the person coming up to me appears to be someone in greater need, and it's not something that is of any particular value to me, then I might be able to see my way clear to saying, well, that person actually needs it more than I do, and be gracious about letting them have it.
Exactly. We had a social experiment in high school, and the idea was intrinsic honesty, ethics, that type of thing, and it was very similar to what you're talking about. The person running the program didn't tell us this was happening, right? Dropped $10 bill. Okay, and this is a long time ago. We're $10, and you're in high school, so $10 means a lot to. And the idea was, it's whoever found it, were they just going to find it and keep it, or were they going to make an announcement, or were they going to do? And that was the whole idea, was what would you do if that occurred, right? Now, the person who found the money, who found the $10, didn't say a word. Okay, so as it went on, then this person said, I think I lost some money earlier. I may have dropped some money here. Did anybody find? All right, and then the kid, now he's in a dilemma. So he did finally say, yeah, I found it. But he didn't do like you did. Well, how much did you lose? He didn't go to that degree. It was, I think, more of an embarrassment thing, because everyone saw him pick up the money, right? He said, okay, well, we know it wasn't yours, and you picked it up. And now she said, I dropped this. I think I lost some money when I came into the room. Did anybody happen to find it?
I think that goes back to your point, Janice, that you said we want to be able to look at ourselves
Mhm.
as being honest, and sometimes we need help to get there. And that's where the public perception can actually motivate us to act in a way that we really want to act, but sometimes we're torn. $50, it's not going to make or break my life.
Right.
I'll be okay either way, but I could go buy something awfully nice for my wife with $50.
Mhm.
And then there's always that serendipity. Oh, this is found money. That always seems to make it more valuable than psychologically. But at the same time, yeah.
There is a social experiment that Daniel Kahneman talks about in his book, Thinking Fast and Slow. He said that in a company break room, there was an honor box next to food that was for sale. And
That's a good one.
yeah, you've heard the story, Frank. And they had some problems with the honor box and people being honorable. So they put a picture up of a pair of eyes staring at you as you would approach the snacks and the honor box, and suddenly everything was paid for. All the monies and goods were accounted for.
Yeah, that's when I was in Hong Kong, gosh, 1981, and everywhere you went, you saw this pair of eyes, the same pair of eyes, with a sign that said, "Hong Kong is watching you, don't litter." And we were told that Hong Kong had been one of the most littered cities in the world. And they came up with this campaign, and it was extraordinarily successful.
Wow.
That exact same idea. When we feel that we are being watched, and we feel that sense of accountability, it really does change our behavior. Dan Ariely has all kinds of fascinating studies on this type of thing. He said that they would give students some kind of a test that was on the honor system, and before, with one group, they would make reference to the 10 Commandments. Maybe they asked them to write it down, and most people can't write down all 10 Commandments. But it didn't matter. even the ones who only knew one or two, there was a dramatic difference just by getting them to think about the 10 Commandments
Yeah.
before they started the exercise, dramatically increased the reliability and the trustworthiness of their results. We just need little nudges to remind us to do the right thing, and most of us will at that point.
Yeah, I think peer pressure, shame, and accountability come into play. Because you don't want your friends thinking, well, you're a crook, basically. You took this money, or and then they can shame you into it. I like to think, because I've been to Hong Kong myself when I was in the high-tech world, and I've seen those things with the eyes watching. We're watching you. Please don't. In California, Janice, remember we had people would fling stuff out the window in their
Yeah.
car,
Yeah.
and they had a big thing about not littering, and we're
Yeah.
watching you and the whole thing. And at the beaches, the eyes and all of that type of stuff. And I think some of it is just making an awareness. Let's be aware that this is not good. This is not the right thing to do. Let's we're all in this together. Now, it doesn't have a whole lot to do with the $50, but I think it has to do a great deal to do with accountability and awareness. Are you aware that something is wrong, or could potentially be wrong, and that you should do the right thing?
I like the idea that we are better together.
Yeah.
And I also know that through mirror neurons, we will mimic and pick up each other's behavior.
Right.
If you witness a kind act, it can make you tear up, as an example. So that says something profound or significant. I'm not sure what it is, but something that, maybe says that inclusion is better than seclusion.
Well said, I
Very
think.
much.
Janice, I think you had
Wow.
something. Yeah.
That brings up a whole nother can of worms. But what I wanted to respond to was something Jonas-san said a moment ago about accountability. What I feel when you say the word accountability is that we're responsible for those around us. And I believe one of the tenets of Jewish law is helping those who can't help themselves. At Passover, we're told to invite someone who can't provide their own meal, for example. Invite all of those who have no place to go. And I think the $50 should have gone to charity. I'm going to go back to that premise, because we are all responsible for those around us who can't do for themselves.
The whole concept of tithing in Judaism
Yeah.
is that I recognize that I am fortunate to have an income,
Yes.
whether it's in the form of produce or salary, and therefore we're mandated to give between 10 and 20% of our income. Now, there are various,
Interpretations.
addendum to that calculation, depending on cost of living and such.
Right.
But it's left open. There is a minimum that a person should give, but there's also a maximum. And I figure out where on that continuum is really reasonable, because if I have everything I need, and it's interesting because the Hebrew word for charity is tzedakah, which comes from tzedek, which means justice. Right? It doesn't come from a word meaning mercy or kindness. If I have more than I need, it is just that I help those who don't have enough. But it's not mandated by the state to come and do it for me. It's mandated by God for me to be responsible for those to the degree that I can, and for me to make that calculation. It also limits the amount that I can give under normal circumstances, because if I give too much, then I become poor, and then I become a burden on others. So there's a tremendous amount of self-evaluation and self-reflection. And as you say, Janice, it's a worthy practice that when something comes to me unexpected, and it's not something I particularly need, that my first thought goes to, how could I use this to benefit others?
Right.
Exactly. It's a great point. Great point.
I like
Okay.
the suggestion that you made early on, Jonathan, that if you can't make a determination on what should be done with this windfall or this unexpected event, then you could sort of shift or step to the right with the question of what can be done with it. You know, if you can't answer what virtuous thing should be done, then maybe you can shift to the position of what virtuous thing can be done. I really like that.
I think that has a lot to do with how I see an ethical mindset, which is always what's the greatest good that can reasonably be done. You know, I can't fix everything in the world.
That's right.
Enough trouble fixing my own house. But when those opportunities arise, why not take advantage of them? You know, again, it goes back to what you said early on, Janice, and I think was so critical, that it's the way we look at ourselves. And if I love Stephen L. Carter, who's a Yale professor of law professor. He says that integrity comes from the word integer. An integer is a whole number.
Yeah.
A person with integrity is a whole person.
Yeah.
I have my values and I live them consistently.
Mhm.
And I don't look for loopholes and I don't look for exceptions. And that if we all set a higher standard for ourselves, you know, at least aspirationally, even if we don't meet them all the time, but we're aspiring to a higher standard, then, as you said, Eric, you know, we support one another, we reinforce one another. If I'm conscious of living in a community where people are holding themselves to a higher standard, then I'm going to be more inclined to do that. You know, Simon Sinek tells this story that I've told many times. I just love it. He and his friend were walking down the sidewalk, chatting, and in front of them, there's a guy whose backpack had split open, and things started falling out of it. And as they were walking, without even saying anything, without even breaking their conversation, they just started picking up the stuff that was falling, and collecting it, and sped up and caught up with the guy at the corner, and said, "Excuse us, the stuff fell out of your backpack. Be careful, you don't lose anything else." And he thanked them, and that was that. He said at the next corner, a fellow came up to them and said, "You know, I saw what you did for that guy. That was really cool."
Exactly.
And I'm a little
right.
ambivalent about the story because, that we're living in a society where that's considered cool,
Yes.
out of the ordinary, is a
Well,
little bit disturbing, but at the
Yeah.
same time, it does show the impact we can have on those around us.
Well, it's like whether in business or personal relationships, how far out of your way do you go for people? Let's say you're hired to do a certain kind of project, and you decide that this other part needs to be done, and so you do it without asking for anything in return. Maybe you give extra time or extra resources or extra whatever. You want to feel good, and you make the other person happy. And according to the mirror neuron theory, when they're happy, you're happy. And you feel good about living an honest, generous, giving kind of life versus the person that's always taking.
Well, that's a challenge given the current state of the world right now, because it seems to
Right.
be, it's skewed the other way. Yeah, I'm in it for me, and I'm going to take all I can get, and the hell with you.
Right.
And you're a burden, and figure it out yourself. I think the Simon Sinek story is nice because it's this the act of kindness. I think maybe it's the mirror neuron. You see someone doing something good. All right, you may, if you're a decent human being, you may be inclined to try and do something good for somebody else.
Yeah.
I remember I would go to Starbucks years ago every day, through the drive-through, and then they started doing that paying for the person behind you type thing, right? All right. And so as you got there, well, you were supposed to pay for the person behind you, right? And I think that it becomes contagious. Act of kindness,
Yes,
which costs, in many cases, costs nothing, an act of kindness,
right.
but it means the world to someone. And I think when people see that, they'll say, look, there's still some good in the world,
Yes.
even though sometimes there's a challenge. There is some good in the world. And if this individual can do that, then I should be able to do the same thing. And who can I do something for? And I think once we start moving back toward that type of mindset, things will be better all the way around.
Mm-hmm.
I remember thinking when I found that $40 at the restaurant, and then I gave it to the young man at the next table. You know, when my overactive mind, overactive left brain, or whatever part of my brain it was that was nagging at me, you know, that crow of criticism on my shoulder. Well, you know, he's gonna keep that money. How do you know what he's gonna do with it? Is he gonna do the right thing? Is he? I remember thinking to myself to shut up that voice in my head. This guy is younger than me. A quick assessment of how they're dressed and you know, everything else. I'm thinking myself that he is not as well off as my wife and I are. And if he uses that money for the tip or for his meal, you know, that might help him out. It would help him out more than it would help you out.
Right.
So I remember having that argument with myself, you know, listen, brain, I need you to stop fretting over this. And here's why. We did the best thing we could with that money after we made a decision about what we should do with it and couldn't do that. You know, we did the next best thing. And oh, by the way, it's you don't have to worry about it anymore. Mind your own business.
There's a story about a rabbi who was in charge of the local charity fund, and then people would come to him throughout the day and explain their situations, and he would evaluate how much from the community pot he could afford to give. And then this one fellow comes in and he's just got this litany of woes, you know, everything you could imagine, disease and debts and troubles and problems, and the rabbi just says, you know, gives him practically everything he has. And as he's walking out, his attendant comes in and says, Rabbi, you didn't give him a donation, did you? Of course I did. All the problems that fellow has. He goes, he's a known liar. He makes all this stuff up. None of it's true. And the rabbi said, oh, thank God that nobody's actually suffering as much as he described.
Oh,
And
wow.
while there is a certain obligation to try to verify that recipients of charity are worthy, but I think your point, Eric, is that, you know, even if sometimes they're not,
That's right.
it's not necessarily our job to determine the worthiness of every recipient. Sometimes people are in psychological pain, even if it's not really financial straits.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's simply the act of someone doing something for them that can relieve that suffering.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, we should be careful with our donations and try to get them to places they're going to do the most good. But we're limited to the degree that we actually control that.
You know, there's something else that comes to mind here, though, I want to ask about. And I've got a little story that goes with it. Can we help others with tough decision making? Can we do things to, I don't know, to preempt or be part of a better world? And here's the story. This is my phone, and if if you look real closely, you'll see, if found, please call this number. And the number that's on the screensaver of my phone is my wife's phone number. And on her phone, it says, if found, please call my number. There was a study done where iPhones were deposited around the city. And they wanted to see how many of them would be returned and came back. And the ones without that message on the screensaver, none of them came back.
Wow.
The ones with the message on the screensaver, 9 out of 10 of the iPhones came back. So, you know, what does that suggest? And how can we walk through life setting the best example, you know, without killing ourselves, breaking our back, trying to be pious or perfect, which we'll fail at.
You know what that reminds me of? I was at a restaurant recently and I thought I had lost some sunglasses. So I went back the next day to look for the sunglasses. And the waitress opens up their idea of a lost and found was a drawer. And I look in the drawer, there are a lot of sunglasses, not mine, but I see a wallet. And I said, oh, how long has that wallet been there? And she goes, oh, a while. I said, well, why don't you look at it, figure out whose it is, and try to track them down. And she said, oh, I don't know. And it was just one of those people who just doesn't think outside the box. So she handed it to me. I looked at it, wrote down the name, went to Facebook and tracked down 2 people had that name. And I sent them a DM and I said, if you lost a wallet at such and such a restaurant, it's there. You should go get it.
Wow.
Oh my goodness.
I think the story you described, Eric, is you tell someone what to do. Going back to your point, Janice, said, go do this. More times than not, the people will do it, right? If they don't know what to do, like this young woman, they're not going to do anything, or they'll keep it themselves, right? In the case of the iPhones. But if you give them, here's the right thing to do, call this number, more times than not, they will. And part of the training that the restaurant should be doing is make an effort to reach outside the box. I think some of that, I think we've had this conversation before, that it goes to the culture or the leadership. What kind of leadership are you bringing into your organization or into your life or into your family? And are you making that a point, like a teaching point? Is that something that matters? And then that person should react and do the right thing. They should. You don't know if they will, but they should. At least they were aware. That makes sense?
Very much so. And you know, I think well, you can wrap up with this idea that leadership doesn't just come from people who have an official title of leaders.
Exactly.
Yes.
Whenever we set a positive example, we are helping others do better.
Yes.
And you know, we lament our political leaders, but we keep voting them in.
Well, we're not given much
well, that's
wide choice. That's
this is a topic for another day, but but you know, it does reflect it's you know, it's a reciprocal influence. It's sort of a you know, it's a vicious circle in the sense that we get the leaders that we choose, and then we become influenced by the leaders that we have chosen. And looking for ways to influence culture on our own level is what's in our hands. We may not be able to influence the big picture. I'll just finish up with one last story, because a friend of mine as a student was traveling in South Korea, and he lost his camera. He was on a hike and he just walked away and forgot it and left it sitting wherever he was, and tried to retrace his steps, couldn't find it. When he got back to town, we were located in Busan, he went and reported it to the police. And he was only there for a few days. He went in every day, checked in, and they said, we're looking. If we find it, we'll let you know. Well, they didn't find it. And he had to go on with his tour, and they had a few other stops. And he got home back to the States a few weeks later, and there was a package waiting for him. And it was the camera.
Wow.
Mm,
They had not only found it, but they had shipped it to him at their expense
Wow.
with a letter apologizing for not getting it back to him
Wow.
sooner.
in time for him to have it before he left.
Wow.
Wow. That's big.
And I have always remembered that story of going that step beyond, taking responsibility, even when I don't really have any moral obligation, simply because I can.
Yep.
And if we try to cultivate that attitude in ourselves, we hope it'll rub off on others. And that's how we change a culture. That's how we change the world. So thank you for a delightful discussion. Janice Litfin,
Pleasure.
thank you for your first time on the panel. Eric and Frank, welcome back again. Thank you for returning. And I hope I will see you in the future. For those of you who are watching or listening, if you have a topic you'd like us to take up, please go to jonasandgoldson.com. Use the contact information. Submit your idea, and if it's compelling, we will definitely use it for a future episode. And until then, always continue to grapple with the gray.
Thank you so much.